Injunctions come from a branch of the law called equity, which has to do with justice and fairness. And sometimes you might have the legal right to do something, but it's just wrong. Right. So that injunctions comes from that branch of the law that is concerned about remedying unconscionable activity. All right. You own a piece of land and you want to burn your rubbish on your land, but during exercising your constitutional right to burn your rubbish on your land, you are actually disturbing your neighbors. Right. So the injunction comes in to stop that. So this is where we need to appreciate the power of the injunction, in that an injunction really stops the exercise of one or more of your constitutional rights. Like I said, you're burning your rubbish on your land. This is my land. Right, is your right. It really stops you from enjoying certain of your constitutional rights. In the interest of equity. Or your legal rights, in the interest of balancing it against somebody else's right. Right. So it's a very serious remedy. And that is why when you come to an attorney and you give instructions as to the harm that is happening to you, an attorney is going to make sure that it is something really worthy of invoking the court in that kind of exalted capacity to use its power in that kind of way against another citizen. So you're not going to get an injunction for some frivolous reason. You're going to get an injunction if there's a serious issue that has to be determined, there are serious rights that are being infringed. That is when you're going to get an injunction. Now, in civil injunction meaning matters involving the rights of one citizen against another, who are not involved in a matrimonial kind of way, if I could use that. So we're not talking criminal law and we're not talking matrimonial law. Right. But in a civil, a case involving a civil injunction, so like you have two neighbors. Yes, two neighbors. Right. You have to actually promise the court that if I ask my attorney to come here and get an injunction and stop my neighbor from building his fence, stop my neighbor from using his own driveway because of whatever I'm saying is infringing. I have to promise that if at the full hearing of the matter, the judge is of the view that I made a bad request. Maybe I just wanted to, as we say, John be the man. I have to promise that I am going to pay him compensation. Wow. If I invoked the court in that powerful capacity on a wild goose chase or on a wrong instance, you have to make that promise. Now, interestingly, in matrimonial matters, you can get injunctions as well. Unfortunately. What I wanted to ask before we go to matrimonial, because I must say that I sit here and I marvel in just the manner in which you are explaining this information. And I really hope that all our attendees, truly as I am, are benefiting from the quality and the depth of how Mrs. Campbell-James this evening is explaining this to us. Before we move over to matrimonial types, though, I wanted to come back for a very important point you would have made there, that I believe that sometimes members of the public may struggle to grasp because they become so emotionally invested in their claim or in the wrong that they perceive that is happening to them, that it clouds their logical reasoning ability as regards to whether or not this matter is in fact as serious as they may want to make it out to be,
or if it is frivolous. You just mentioned that, a person needs to make sure that the reason they're coming or the reason they're invoking the court to ask for this type of relief need to be substantive enough. Now, when an attorney at law is making this judgment call, so to speak, if to even apply for an injunction, we're talking here to clients, and I do know we may have some young attorneys here having to figure out, well, does my client really need one? What are some things would an attorney or should an attorney at law look for that would distinguish the worthiness of the claim, or whether or not it would in fact make sense to seek injunctive relief?
All right. Okay, so I'm going to come back to that, but I just want to close off one point I was making about the matrimonial injunctions before I forget. So I just said with civil injunctions, you have to give that undertaking that you will pay compensation if you are wrong. In matrimonial matters, you do not have to do that. You don't have to make that promise. Okay? And we can talk about that after. Now, concerning civil matters and how do you convince a judge that an injunction ought to be granted?
Even before you judge, Ms. Ms.𝗂𝗂, we're talking here about client and
with the attorney. All right.
Yeah, sometimes clients.
So you would want. So if somebody comes to me and I would ask them, okay, so what is your problem and so on, and they tell me, for example, someone is as I said, building a fence wall and it is encroaching on their property. Let's say it's encroaching of a foot on their property, or maybe it's encroaching 3 feet into their property. Let's say, for example, the person is doing some kind of a construction that is potentially hindering the flow of the sewage and the drainage in that area, so that the client is going to experience flooding on their property from the backup. Those are the kinds of serious matters that you would want to consider an injunction for. All right. So with respect to the
loud music?
I'll just get back to that. So with respect to the wall, let's say the wall has already gone up. Let's say you were on vacation, you came back and the wall has already gone up. You have to balance, okay, this person encroached on my property a foot, and land here is X amount of money per square foot or something like that. And if I have lost X amount of square feet valued, so on. So do I want to press to have this wall broken down and rebuilt, or would it simply be more practical to ask for compensation? Right. And not bother to go for the injunction, but just sue for that encroachment, sue for that trespass, and expect money in compensation, not an injunction. But if it's something like maybe 10 feet of your property, that's a substantial sum. And, that is a serious infringement of your rights. So I might say, okay, let's consider the injunction for something like that. Let's consider the injunction for something like that. You had just said something else.
Yes, we got a lot of questions from the last
loud music
question about the loud music. It was so popular. I don't know if Mr. Francis is still on.
All right. I think that there are circumstances where an attorney could say, okay, we will definitely take this to court. But there are also circumstances when you would not. I think sometimes, some parts of the city, I'm not sure, I stand to be corrected. I think there are some parts of the city of Port of Spain and the environs that are kind of classified public, or have become so public as a result of the amount of commercial enterprise and bars and so on we have in the area, so that if you're looking at it from the point of view of how many people reside in this area and how many people are conducting business in this area. You may have to balance the rights of those people and say, well, you know, a great number of people do business here and they outweigh the residents here. So we might allow the loud music, but we might change. We might say, okay, only at certain times to help out those who are living here and who can't afford to go and live somewhere else. It's always a balancing act in terms of rights. It's always a balancing act. Very often, it's a very tricky balancing act. Sometimes you might be lucky where somebody is clearly the villain and somebody is clearly the good guy, but it's not always so. Very often, it's both sides have some serious issues to be discussed in the court, to be ventilated in the court, and you really need the court to be incisive and looking, okay, we have this person's right here, we have this person's right here. How are we going to balance the two?